Welcome to the English Talk community. I'm Julia, and I know exactly how you feel right now. You want to speak English confidently, but sometimes your mind goes blank, right? You translate everything from your native language first, and it feels so slow and frustrating. I understand this feeling completely because I've helped thousands of English learners just like you overcome this exact same challenge. You're sitting there, maybe listening to this while doing something else, and you're thinking about all those times when you wanted to say something in English, but the words just wouldn't come out naturally. Maybe you were in a meeting, or talking to a friend, or even just trying to order food, and your brain decided to take a vacation right when you needed it most. Today, we're going to change that together. I'm going to show you simple ways to start thinking in English naturally, without forcing yourself through complicated exercises or boring textbook methods. This isn't about perfect pronunciation or knowing every single word in the dictionary. This is about feeling comfortable and confident when English words flow through your mind. You deserve to feel proud of your English progress, and I'm here to make sure that happens. Before we begin our journey together, I want to ask you something important. How many times have you started learning English and then stopped because it felt too difficult? How many times have you thought you're not smart enough or talented enough to really speak English well? I want you to know that these thoughts are completely normal, and they don't define your ability to learn. Every single person who speaks English fluently today had moments of doubt and frustration. The difference between people who succeed and people who give up isn't talent or intelligence. The difference is having the right approach and staying consistent with small daily practices. If what I'm saying right now sounds exactly like what you need to hear, I want you to do something for me. Give this episode a like right now. Not later, not when you finish listening, but right now. When you hit that like button, you're making a commitment to yourself that today is the day you start changing your relationship with English. You're telling your brain that you're serious about this, and you're ready to try something different. Also, make sure to subscribe to our community because I release new episodes every week, and each one is designed to help you feel more confident and natural with English. You know what I love most about helping people with English? It's seeing that moment when everything clicks. When you stop fighting with the language and start flowing with it. When English stops feeling like a subject you're studying and starts feeling like a tool you're using to express your thoughts and connect with people. That moment is coming for you sooner than you think, but it requires you to trust the process and trust yourself. I remember talking to Elena from Valencia last month. She told me she had been studying English for 8 years, and she still felt like a beginner every time she tried to have a real conversation. She would prepare sentences in her head, translate them perfectly, practice them, and then when it was time to speak, everything would disappear. She felt so frustrated that she almost gave up completely. But then she started using the techniques I'm going to share with you today, and within just 3 weeks, she called me to say that she had her first completely natural English conversation with her neighbor. She wasn't translating anymore. She wasn't preparing sentences. The words were just coming to her in English first. This can happen to you too, but you need to understand something very important. Your brain is not broken. Your English learning ability is not damaged. You're not too old, too busy, or too anything to learn this language well. What you might be missing is the right approach to train your brain to think in English instead of translating all the time. Most English courses teach you words and rules, but they don't teach you how to rewire your thinking patterns. They don't show you how to make English feel natural and automatic. That's exactly what we're going to focus on today. I'm going to share techniques that work for real people living real lives. Not perfect students in perfect conditions, but busy people like you who want to improve their English while managing work, family, and everything else that fills up your day. These are methods you can practice while walking, cooking, driving, or even just lying in bed before you sleep. Let's make English feel less scary and more like a friend you're getting to know, because that's exactly what it should be. English should feel like a friend who understands you, who helps you express your ideas, and who makes you feel confident and proud of yourself. You're not alone in this journey, and I'm here to help you feel more confident every single day. Together, we're going to transform the way you think about English, and more importantly, the way you think in English. You know what stops most people from thinking in English? They believe they need to translate everything perfectly first. This is probably the biggest myth I encounter when working with English learners, and it's keeping you stuck in a cycle that feels exhausting and discouraging. Right now, as you're listening to me, I bet part of your brain is still translating some of these words back to your native language. That's completely normal. But today I want to show you why this habit is actually slowing down your progress and how you can start breaking free from it. Let me tell you about Maria from Madrid. She contacted me 2 years ago, completely frustrated with her English journey. She had been studying for over 6 years, knew thousands of vocabulary words, could read English books, and understood movies pretty well. But when it came to speaking, she would freeze. Every single conversation felt like a mental marathon because she was translating every single word in her head before speaking. She would think of what she wanted to say in Spanish, then carefully translate each word to English, check if the sentence sounded right, and only then would she speak. By that time, the conversation had usually moved on to a different topic, and she felt left behind and embarrassed. Maria thought this translation process was normal and necessary. She believed that thinking in English was something only native speakers could do, or maybe people who had lived in English-speaking countries for many years. She was convinced that she needed to master perfect translation skills before she could even dream of thinking directly in English. This belief was destroying her confidence and making every English interaction feel like hard work instead of natural communication. One day, during one of our coaching sessions, I gave Maria a simple challenge. I asked her to stop trying to translate and just start describing what she saw around her room using the simplest English words she could think of. Not sentences, not perfect descriptions, just single words or very basic phrases. She looked around and started saying words like tree, blue, car, happy, window, book, coffee, warm. She wasn't thinking about Spanish at all during this exercise. She was just connecting what she saw and felt directly with English words. That was the moment everything changed for Maria. She realized that her brain already knew hundreds of English words without needing translation. When she saw a tree, she could think tree without thinking about the Spanish word first. When she felt happy, the word happy was already available in her mind. She had been making the process much more complicated than it needed to be. Within just a few weeks of practicing this direct connection approach, Maria started having her first natural English conversations. She wasn't translating anymore. She was thinking and responding directly in English. This is exactly what I want you to understand today. Your brain is already much smarter and more capable than you give it credit for. You don't need perfect translation skills to start thinking in English. In fact, trying to translate everything is probably the biggest obstacle standing between you and natural English fluency. Every time you translate, you're reinforcing a mental pathway that makes English feel foreign and difficult. But when you start connecting thoughts, feelings, and observations directly with English words, you're building new pathways that make English feel natural and automatic. Think about this for a moment. When you were a child learning your first language, did anyone teach you to translate? Of course not. You learned by connecting words directly with experiences, objects, feelings, and ideas. You heard the word for mother and connected it directly with the person who took care of you. You learned the word for hungry by connecting it directly with that feeling in your stomach. No translation was involved. Your brain made direct connections between language and reality. This is exactly the same process you can use to think in English, regardless of your age or how long you've been studying. Your brain still has this amazing ability to make direct connections. The only difference is that now you might have some old habits that are getting in the way. The translation habit is just that, a habit. And like any habit, it can be changed with the right approach and consistent practice. I want to share something that might surprise you. Many of my most successful students are people who initially thought they were terrible at languages. They struggled with traditional learning methods, felt confused by complicated explanations, and believed they would never speak English naturally. But when they stopped trying to translate everything and started building direct connections, their progress accelerated dramatically. They discovered that thinking in English isn't about being smart or talented. It's about training your brain to work in a different way. Here's what happens in your brain when you translate versus when you think directly in English. When you translate, your brain has to access your native language first. Find the equivalent English word or phrase, check if it sounds correct, and then produce the English version. This process involves multiple steps and uses a lot of mental energy. It's like taking a long, complicated route to get somewhere that's actually very close to where you are. But when you think directly in English, your brain accesses English words and concepts immediately, without going through your native language first. This is like taking the shortest, most direct path to your destination. It requires much less mental energy, feels more natural, and allows you to respond much faster in conversations. The goal isn't to stop knowing your native language. The goal is to have both languages available in your brain, so you can choose which one to use depending on the situation. Let me tell you about another student, Carlos, from Barcelona. He was convinced that his brain wasn't wired for English because translation felt so difficult and exhausting. He would spend 10 minutes crafting a single sentence in his head, translating each word carefully, and by the time he was ready to speak, he had forgotten what the conversation was about. Carlos thought this meant he wasn't intelligent enough for English, but the real problem wasn't his intelligence. The problem was his approach. When Carlos started practicing direct English thinking using simple words and basic concepts, everything changed. Instead of trying to translate complex ideas, he started expressing simple thoughts directly in English. Instead of trying to say exactly what he would say in Spanish, he started saying what he could say easily in English. This shift in approach made English feel accessible and enjoyable instead of frustrating and impossible. You can start making this same shift right now. Your brain already contains thousands of English words that don't need translation. When you see red, you can think red. When you feel tired, you can think tired. When you want water, you can think water. These direct connections already exist in your mind. The key is to start using them more often and building confidence in this natural process. The beautiful thing about direct English thinking is that it grows naturally. Once you start connecting simple concepts directly with English words, your brain begins to create more and more of these direct pathways. You'll find yourself thinking basic thoughts in English without even trying. Then those basic thoughts will gradually become more complex and sophisticated. But it all starts with trusting that your brain can work directly in English, without translation as a middleman. This is the foundation we're going to build on as we continue exploring how to think in English naturally and speak with more confidence. Here's your first practical step, and I want you to start using it today. Start thinking about your daily actions in English using the simplest words possible. When you wake up in the morning, instead of thinking about waking up in your native language and then translating it, just think the words "I wake up." When you brush your teeth, think "I brush my teeth." When you drink coffee, think "I drink coffee." This might sound almost too simple, but this is exactly how you begin rewiring your brain to operate in English mode. Let me tell you about Sophie from Paris. Sophie came to me 8 months ago feeling completely stuck in her English learning journey. She had been taking English classes for 3 years, had completed multiple online courses, and could understand English quite well when reading or watching movies. But when she tried to speak, everything felt slow and unnatural. She would think of what she wanted to say in French, carefully translate it to English, worry about whether it sounded correct, and by the time she was ready to speak, the moment had usually passed. Sophie was frustrated because she felt like she understood English well, but she couldn't access it quickly when she needed to speak. She described it as having English locked away in a filing cabinet in her brain, and every time she wanted to use it, she had to find the right key, unlock the cabinet, search through the files, and then carefully extract what she needed. This process was exhausting and made every English conversation feel like hard work. When I introduced Sophie to this technique of thinking about daily actions in simple English, she was honestly a bit skeptical. She thought it was too basic and wouldn't help her with real conversations. But I convinced her to try it for just 2 weeks, and the results completely surprised her. Within the first week, she started noticing that English words were popping into her head more naturally throughout the day. By the second week, she realized that her English conversations were becoming noticeably faster and more fluid. What happened to Sophie is exactly what will happen to you when you start practicing this technique consistently. You're not trying to impress anyone with complex sentences or fancy vocabulary. You're not trying to sound like a native speaker on your first day. You're simply training your brain to think in English mode instead of translation mode. This is about building a foundation of automatic English thinking that will support everything else you want to do with the language. The beauty of this approach is that it uses actions and moments that happen every single day. You don't need to set aside special study time or find perfect conditions to practice. You can do this while living your normal life. When you get out of bed, think "I get up." When you look in the mirror, think "I look in the mirror." When you put on clothes, think "I put on clothes." When you open the door, think "I open the door." These are thoughts that require zero translation because they're describing exactly what you're doing in the moment. I want you to understand something important about why this works so effectively. When you think about your actions in simple English as you're doing them, you're creating direct connections between your physical experiences and English words. Your brain starts to associate English with real life instead of just with textbooks and classrooms. English becomes connected to your actual daily experience rather than feeling like something separate and academic. This is completely different from traditional language learning approaches that focus on memorizing lists of vocabulary or practicing conversations about hypothetical situations. Instead, you're using English to narrate your real life as it happens. This makes the language feel authentic and personal, rather than artificial and distant. Your brain responds much better to language that feels connected to your actual experience. Let me share what happened with another student, Alessandro from Milan. Alessandro worked as a chef and spent most of his day in a busy kitchen. He was passionate about cooking, but felt frustrated that he couldn't express his culinary knowledge in English when tourists asked him questions about the menu. He had tried studying English through cooking vocabulary lists and restaurant phrase books, but nothing seemed to stick when he was under pressure in real conversations. When Alessandro started using this daily action technique, he began narrating his cooking process in simple English while he worked. I chop onions, I heat the pan, I add salt, I stir the sauce, I taste the food. At first, he felt a bit silly talking to himself in English while cooking, but within a few days, it became completely natural. After 2 weeks of consistent practice, he noticed something amazing. When tourists asked him questions about food, English words started coming to him much more quickly and naturally. Alessandro realized that by connecting English to his daily cooking activities, he had created a bridge between his expertise and his ability to express it in English. The language was no longer something separate from his work. It had become integrated into his professional skills. This is exactly the kind of transformation that happens when you start thinking in English about your regular daily activities. The key to success with this technique is to start incredibly simple and gradually build complexity. Don't worry about using perfect sentences or sophisticated vocabulary. Focus on the most basic actions and the most common verbs. I walk, I sit, I eat. I drink, I work, I rest, I think, I feel. These simple patterns will become automatic, and once they're automatic, your brain will naturally start building more complex thoughts using the same direct English thinking process. You might be wondering how long you should practice this each day. The wonderful thing about this technique is that it doesn't require dedicated study time. You can practice it while doing things you already do every day. But if you want to accelerate your progress, try to be conscious about narrating your actions in English for at least 10 minutes each day. You can do this while getting ready in the morning, preparing meals, exercising, or doing household tasks. Some of my students find it helpful to focus on one specific routine each day. For example, Monday might be morning routine day, where you focus on thinking in English about everything you do from waking up until you leave home. Tuesday might be evening routine day, where you practice English thinking while preparing dinner and getting ready for bed. This approach helps you build consistency without feeling overwhelmed. Remember, the goal isn't perfection. The goal is creating new pathways in your brain that make English thinking feel natural and automatic. Every time you think I brush my teeth instead of translating brush teeth from your native language, you're strengthening these new pathways. Every time you think I drink coffee instead of going through the translation process, you're building the foundation for more complex English thinking. What makes this technique so powerful is that it works with your brain's natural learning processes instead of against them. Your brain is designed to connect language with experience, and that's exactly what you're doing when you narrate your daily actions in English. You're not fighting against your natural learning abilities. You're working with them to create lasting change in how you access and use English. As you continue practicing this technique, you'll start noticing that English thoughts begin appearing in your mind spontaneously, without any effort from you. This is when you know the technique is really working. Your brain is starting to choose English automatically for certain thoughts and situations. This spontaneous English thinking is the foundation that will support all the other techniques we'll explore for building confidence and fluency in English conversations. Now let's talk about having conversations with yourself. Yes, you heard that right. And I know it might sound a bit strange at first, but this is one of the most powerful techniques you can use to develop natural English thinking. I want you to imagine that you have a friendly English-speaking friend living inside your head, and you can talk to this friend anytime you want without any judgment or pressure. This internal conversation practice will revolutionize the way you access English in real situations. Let me tell you about Marco from Rome. Marco contacted me last year because he felt confident reading and writing in English, but whenever he had to speak with English speakers, he would panic and forget everything he knew. He described it as having two different brains: his reading brain that understood English perfectly, and his speaking brain that went completely blank whenever someone asked him a question. Marco was particularly frustrated because he worked in tourism and needed to communicate with English-speaking visitors every day. When I suggested that Marco start having conversations with himself in English, he laughed and thought I was joking. But I explained to him that this wasn't about being crazy or talking to imaginary people. This was about creating a safe space where his brain could practice accessing English without any external pressure or fear of making mistakes. I told him to start with just 5 minutes each morning while making his coffee, asking himself simple questions about his day, and answering in the most basic English he could manage. Marco was skeptical, but he agreed to try it for 2 weeks. Every morning, while his coffee was brewing, he would ask himself questions like, "What will I do today? How do I feel? What do I want to eat?" At first, he felt incredibly silly and self-conscious, even though he was completely alone in his kitchen. But by the 3rd day, something interesting started happening. The English words were coming to him more quickly, and he wasn't translating as much from Italian. By the end of the 1st week, he was actually enjoying these morning English conversations with himself. The transformation in Marco's speaking confidence was remarkable. Within 2 weeks, he noticed that when tourists asked him questions at work, his brain wasn't freezing up anymore. The English words were more accessible, and he could respond more naturally. What had happened was that through these daily internal conversations, Marco had trained his brain to switch into English mode more easily. He had created a bridge between understanding English and producing English. This technique works because it removes all the social pressure and anxiety that often blocks our English speaking ability. When you talk to yourself, there's no one to impress, no one to judge your pronunciation, no one to get impatient if you need a moment to find the right word. You can take all the time you need, make all the mistakes you want, and practice expressing your thoughts without any external pressure whatsoever. The beauty of internal English conversations is that you can practice anywhere and anytime. You don't need a conversation partner, you don't need to schedule practice time with other people, and you don't need to worry about finding someone who speaks English. Your internal conversation partner is always available, always patient, and always ready to help you practice. This makes it the perfect technique for people with busy schedules or limited access to English speakers. I want you to start with the simplest possible questions and gradually build complexity as you become more comfortable with the process. Begin with questions about your immediate experience. How do I feel right now? What do I see around me? What am I doing? These questions connect directly to your current reality, so the answers don't require complex thinking or abstract concepts. You're simply describing your present moment experience in English. Let me share what happened with another student, Isabella from Barcelona. Isabella was a university student studying international business, and she needed to improve her English for job interviews and professional meetings. She understood English perfectly when professors lectured or when she read business articles, but she struggled to express her own ideas fluently in English discussions. She would have brilliant thoughts and insights, but when it came time to share them in English, she would stumble and lose confidence. Isabella started practicing internal conversations during her daily walk to university. She would ask herself about her classes, her opinions on business topics, her goals and plans. What did I learn today? What do I think about this business strategy? How would I solve this problem? At first, her internal answers were very simple and basic, but gradually they became more sophisticated and detailed. The key was that she was practicing expressing her actual thoughts and opinions in English, not just repeating memorized phrases or textbook examples. After a month of consistent practice, Isabella's professors started noticing a significant improvement in her English participation during class discussions. She was contributing more confidently and expressing complex ideas more fluently. Isabella realized that the internal conversations had helped her develop the ability to formulate her thoughts directly in English, rather than thinking in Spanish and then translating. One of the most important aspects of this technique is accepting that your internal conversations don't need to be perfect. In fact, they should be imperfect, natural, and authentic. When you talk to yourself internally, you're not trying to create perfect sentences for an English exam. You're trying to develop natural English thinking patterns. This means using simple words when you don't know complex ones, making mistakes without worrying about them, and focusing on communication rather than perfection. I encourage my students to treat their internal English conversations like they would treat conversations with a very close friend. You don't need to be formal or careful about every word choice. You can be casual, spontaneous, and authentic. If you don't know how to say something in English, try to say it in the simplest way possible, or describe it using words you do know. This approach helps develop creativity and flexibility in English expression. The questions you ask yourself can cover any aspect of your life and interests. You might ask about your work, your family, your hobbies, your dreams, your opinions, your daily experiences. The important thing is that these are real questions about your real life, not abstract exercises from a textbook. When you practice expressing your authentic thoughts and experiences in English, you're building the exact skills you need for real English conversations. Some of my students find it helpful to have themed internal conversation days. Monday might be work and career day, where you ask yourself about your job, your professional goals, your workplace experiences. Tuesday might be family and relationships day, where you practice talking about the people important to you. Wednesday might be hobbies and interests day. This approach helps ensure you're developing English vocabulary and thinking patterns across all areas of your life. Remember, the goal of internal conversations is to make English thinking feel natural and automatic. Every time you ask yourself a question in English and answer it without translating from your native language, you're strengthening the neural pathways that support direct English thinking. You're training your brain to access English quickly and confidently, which is exactly what you need for successful, real-world English conversations. As you continue practicing this technique, you'll notice that your internal English voice becomes stronger and more natural. You'll find yourself spontaneously thinking in English throughout the day without even trying to do it. This is when you know the technique is really working, and you're developing the foundation for truly confident English communication. Close your eyes for just a moment and picture your bedroom. I want you to see it clearly in your mind, every detail, every object, every color. Now, instead of thinking about what you see in your native language, I want you to describe it using the simplest English words you know: bed, window, door, clothes, chair, lamp, books. Don't worry about creating perfect sentences or using sophisticated vocabulary. Just connect what you visualize directly with English words. This simple exercise is going to transform the way your brain processes English, and I'm going to show you exactly how to use it to develop natural English thinking. Let me tell you about Anna from Berlin. Anna came to me 9 months ago with a very specific problem. She could understand English movies, read English books, and even write emails in English quite well. But whenever she tried to describe things she could see or explain physical situations in English, she would struggle terribly. She would see a beautiful sunset and want to share her experience with English-speaking friends, but the words would get stuck in her head. She knew the vocabulary, but she couldn't access it quickly when she needed to describe visual experiences. Anna's frustration was particularly intense because she worked as a tour guide in Berlin, and her job required her to describe historical sites, architectural details, and scenic locations to international visitors. She would prepare elaborate descriptions in advance, memorizing complex sentences and sophisticated vocabulary. But when tourists asked spontaneous questions about things they could see, Anna would freeze up and struggle to find even basic English words to describe obvious visual details. When I introduced Anna to this visualization and description technique, she was initially confused about how something so simple could help with her complex speaking challenges. But I explained to her that the problem wasn't her English knowledge or vocabulary. The problem was that her brain wasn't making direct connections between visual experiences and English words. Every time she saw something and wanted to describe it, her brain would first process the visual information in German, then attempt to translate the German description into English. This translation step was creating delays and blocking her natural fluency. I suggested that Anna start practicing this visualization exercise every night before going to sleep. Instead of lying in bed thinking about her day in German, she would look around her bedroom and describe everything she could see using simple English words. Not sentences, not complex descriptions, just basic English vocabulary connected directly to what she was observing. Table, pillow, curtain, book, glass, phone, light, shadow. At first, Anna felt that this exercise was too elementary and wouldn't help her with the sophisticated description she needed for her work. But I convinced her to trust the process and practice consistently for at least 2 weeks. The results were remarkable and happened much faster than either of us expected. Within the first week, Anna noticed that when she looked at objects during her daily life, English words were popping into her head more automatically. By the second week, she realized that she was starting to think about visual details in English without even trying. What was happening in Anna's brain during this practice was exactly what I want to happen in your brain. Every time she looked at an object and thought the English word directly, without going through German first, she was creating and strengthening neural pathways that connected visual processing with English vocabulary. She was training her brain to bypass the translation step and access English words immediately when processing visual information. The transformation in Anna's professional performance was incredible. After just 1 month of consistent visualization practice, tourists started commenting on how naturally and fluently she described the sights of Berlin. Anna realized that she was no longer struggling to find English words for things she could see. The vocabulary was becoming automatically accessible, and she could focus on sharing her knowledge and enthusiasm, rather than worrying about translation. This technique works so effectively because it leverages your brain's natural ability to connect language with sensory experience. When you were a child learning your first language, you didn't learn words by memorizing definitions or translation equivalents. You learned by directly connecting words with things you could see, touch, hear, taste, and smell. You learned the word for ball by seeing balls, playing with balls, and hearing people say ball in connection with that round object you enjoyed playing with. The visualization and description technique recreates this natural learning process for English. Instead of memorizing English words as translations of words you already know in your native language, you're connecting English words directly with visual experiences and mental images. This creates much stronger and more accessible memory connections. When you see something in real life, your brain can access the English word immediately because it's connected to the visual experience, not to a translation process. You can practice this technique anywhere and anytime, not just with your bedroom. When you're sitting in a cafe, look around and mentally describe what you see using simple English words. Coffee, cup, people, table, window, street, car, tree, sky, clouds. When you're on a bus or train, describe the scenery passing by. Houses, fields, hills, river, bridge, road, signs. When you're cooking dinner, describe the ingredients and tools you're using. Onion, knife, pan, water, heat, steam, smell, color. The key to success with this technique is to start with the simplest possible vocabulary and gradually increase complexity as your brain becomes more comfortable with direct English connections. Don't try to describe everything perfectly or use sophisticated adjectives right away. Focus on basic nouns first, then gradually add simple adjectives like big, small, red, blue, old, new, clean, dirty. Eventually, you can add simple action words that describe what you see happening around you. Let me share what happened with Roberto from Lisbon. Roberto was studying to become an English teacher, but he struggled with spontaneous description activities during his training classes. He could explain grammar rules perfectly and discuss abstract educational concepts in English, but when his instructors asked him to describe pictures or explain visual learning materials, he would become tongue-tied and frustrated. Roberto started using the visualization technique during his daily commute to university. He would look out the train window and describe everything he saw using basic English vocabulary: building, people, cars, dogs, shops, signs, colors, movements. He practiced describing not just objects, but also actions and qualities he could observe: people walking, cars moving, dogs running, birds flying, sun shining, wind blowing. After 6 weeks of consistent practice, Roberto's instructors noticed a dramatic improvement in his ability to use English for visual descriptions and explanations. He was participating more confidently in teaching practice sessions and handling spontaneous description tasks with ease. Roberto realized that this simple visualization exercise had solved a problem that months of traditional grammar study hadn't been able to address. The beautiful thing about this technique is that it makes English feel connected to your real-world experience rather than abstract and academic. Every time you look at something and think the English word directly, you're making English feel more natural and integrated into your daily life. You're training your brain to see English as a tool for understanding and describing your actual experience, not just as a subject you study in books or classrooms. As you continue practicing visualization and description, you'll start noticing that English words begin appearing automatically in your mind when you see things, even when you're not consciously trying to practice. This spontaneous English thinking is exactly what you need for natural, confident English conversations. When someone asks you to describe something or explain what you can see, The English words will be immediately accessible because they're directly connected to your visual processing, not dependent on a translation process. This technique creates the foundation for all kinds of English expression that involve describing, explaining, and sharing your observations with other people. Sometimes your mind goes completely blank when speaking English, right? I know that feeling so well, and I want you to understand that this happens to absolutely everyone, even people who speak English fluently. You're in the middle of a conversation, someone asks you a question or makes a comment, and suddenly your brain just stops working. All the English you know seems to disappear, and you're left standing there feeling embarrassed and frustrated. This mental block is one of the most common challenges English learners face, but today I'm going to teach you exactly how to handle these moments with confidence and grace. The secret isn't to avoid these blank moments, because they're going to happen no matter how much you study or practice. The secret is to have a collection of backup phrases that you can use automatically while your brain recovers and finds the words you need. These phrases serve as bridges that keep the conversation flowing smoothly while you gather your thoughts. Instead of standing there in awkward silence or giving up on what you wanted to say, you can use these bridge phrases to buy yourself time and maintain your confidence. Let me tell you about Thomas from Frankfurt. Thomas contacted me last year because he was having terrible experiences in English business meetings. He understood everything perfectly, had great ideas to contribute, and could express himself well in writing. But during face-to-face conversations, especially in professional settings, his mind would go completely blank at the worst possible moments. When his boss asked for his opinion on important projects, when clients asked him questions, or when colleagues wanted his input on decisions, Thomas would freeze up and either stay silent or say something very basic that didn't reflect his actual knowledge and expertise. Thomas was convinced that these mental blocks meant he wasn't good enough at English for his job. He thought other people never experienced these blank moments, and he felt like a fraud whenever he had to participate in English discussions. He was considering avoiding English-speaking meetings altogether, which would have seriously limited his career advancement. Thomas didn't realize that even native English speakers experience mental blocks and use bridge phrases to manage them naturally. When I taught Thomas about backup phrases and bridge expressions, everything changed for him. I explained that these phrases aren't signs of poor English ability. They're tools that fluent speakers use all the time to manage the natural flow of conversation. When you say, "let me think," or "that's interesting," or, you're not admitting that your English is weak. You're using sophisticated conversation management techniques that make you sound more natural and fluent, not less. The key is to practice these bridge phrases until they become completely automatic. You want them to be so deeply embedded in your English speaking patterns that they come out naturally whenever you need a moment to think. This way, when your mind goes blank, instead of panicking or staying silent, these phrases will automatically give you the time and space you need to recover your thoughts and continue speaking confidently. Let me share some of the most useful backup phrases that my students have found helpful. When you need a moment to think about your answer, you can say, "Let me think about that. That's a good question," or, "Well, let me see." When someone says something and you want to show you're listening while you formulate your response, you can say, "That's interesting, I see what you mean," or "That makes sense." When you want to clarify or rephrase something you just said, you can use "what I'm trying to say is," or in other words. These phrases work so effectively because they sound completely natural and conversational. Native speakers use expressions like these constantly in their daily conversations. When you use them, you don't sound like someone who's struggling with English. You sound like someone who's taking time to give thoughtful, considered responses. You sound mature, professional, and engaged in the conversation. Thomas started practicing these phrases during his daily English conversations, both at work and in casual situations. At first, he had to consciously remember to use them when he felt his mind starting to go blank. But within a few weeks, they became automatic responses. When his boss asked him a challenging question during a meeting, instead of freezing up, Thomas would automatically say, "That's a really good question. Let me think about that for a moment." This gave him time to organize his thoughts and respond with confidence. The transformation in Thomas's professional presence was remarkable. His colleagues started perceiving him as more thoughtful and articulate in English, not less capable. They didn't see his use of bridge phrases as signs of language difficulty. They saw them as signs of someone who takes time to give quality responses. Thomas realized that these simple phrases had completely changed his relationship with English conversations from something stressful and threatening to something manageable and professional. Another student, Francesca from Milan, had a different but related challenge. She would get so worried about making mistakes in English that she would speak very quickly, trying to get through sentences before her mind could go blank. This made her English sound rushed and unclear, and ironically made her more likely to make the mistakes she was trying to avoid. When Francesca learned to use bridge phrases, she discovered that she could slow down her English speaking pace and sound much more natural and confident. Francesca started using phrases like, "Let me explain that better. What I want to say is, and actually, let me put it this way." These phrases allowed her to pause, breathe, and organize her thoughts before continuing. Her English conversations became much clearer and more effective because she wasn't rushing through them anymore. People started commenting on how much more confident and articulate she sounded in English. The psychological impact of having these backup phrases ready is just as important as their practical function. When you know you have tools to handle mental blocks, you feel much less anxious about English conversations. You're not constantly worried about what will happen if your mind goes blank, because you know exactly what to do in that situation. This reduced anxiety actually makes mental blocks less likely to happen in the first place. I want you to choose 3 or 4 bridge phrases that feel natural and comfortable for you, and practice them until you can use them without thinking. You might prefer more formal phrases like, "Allow me to consider that," or more casual ones like, "Let me see here." The important thing is that they feel authentic to your personality and speaking style. Practice them in low-pressure situations first, like casual conversations with friends or family members, before using them in more important professional or academic contexts. Remember, you don't need to fill every moment of silence with perfect, complex English sentences. Sometimes the most professional and confident thing you can do is take a moment to think before you speak. These bridge phrases give you permission to take that time while maintaining the flow and connection of the conversation. They show that you're engaged, thoughtful, and committed to giving quality responses, rather than just saying the first thing that comes to mind. As you continue developing your English speaking confidence, these backup phrases will become natural parts of your conversational toolkit. You'll find yourself using them not just when you have mental blocks, but as normal elements of thoughtful, engaging English conversation. They'll help you sound more fluent and natural, while also giving you the psychological security to take risks and express more complex ideas in English. Think about your daily routine and practice describing it in English as you're actually doing these activities. This is where English transforms from something you study to something you live. When you're cooking dinner, don't just cook in silence or think about cooking in your native language. Instead, narrate what you're doing in simple English. I'm cutting vegetables. I'm heating the oil. I'm adding salt. I'm stirring the sauce. When you're walking to work or to the store, describe your experience in English. I'm walking to the store. It's a sunny day. I see many people. The street is busy. This real-time English practice creates the strongest possible connections between the language and your actual life experience. Let me tell you about Isabella from Milan. Isabella had been studying English for 4 years and could handle business emails, read English websites, and understand movies with subtitles. But she felt like English existed in a separate compartment of her brain, completely disconnected from her real life and daily experiences. When she tried to have casual conversations in English, everything felt artificial and forced. She could talk about textbook topics like hobbies and weather, but she couldn't naturally express her actual thoughts, feelings, and experiences in English. Isabella's breakthrough came when she started incorporating English into her daily walks through her neighborhood. Instead of listening to music or thinking about her day in Italian, she began describing everything she experienced during these walks in simple English. I'm walking down this street. I see a red car. The weather is nice today. There are people sitting in the cafe. The trees are green. That dog is very cute. This shop looks interesting. At first, it felt strange and unnatural, but Isabella committed to doing this for 20 minutes every day during her regular evening walk. Within just 2 weeks, something remarkable started happening. Isabella noticed that English thoughts were beginning to appear in her mind spontaneously throughout the day, not just during her designated practice walks. When she saw something interesting or beautiful, her brain would automatically generate English descriptions without her trying to make it happen. When she was cooking and added too much salt to her pasta sauce, her first thought was, "Oh no, too much salt," instead of thinking it in Italian first. The transformation was so dramatic that Isabella's English-speaking colleagues at work started commenting on how much more natural and confident she sounded in casual conversations. She realized that by connecting English with her real daily experiences, She had bridged the gap between academic English knowledge and living English expression. English was no longer something separate from her life. It had become integrated into her actual experience and thinking patterns. This technique works so powerfully because it leverages the natural way your brain creates language habits. When you repeatedly use English to describe real activities as you're doing them, you're training your brain to associate English with authentic experiences rather than artificial study situations. Your brain starts to understand that English isn't just for classrooms and textbooks. English becomes a tool for processing and expressing your real life. The key is to choose activities that you do regularly and consistently. This might be your morning routine of getting ready for work, your evening routine of preparing dinner, your weekly grocery shopping, your daily commute, or your regular exercise routine. The important thing is that these are activities you do anyway, so practicing English during these times doesn't require extra time or special arrangements. You're simply adding English narration to activities that are already part of your life. Let me share what happened with Carlos from Barcelona. Carlos worked as a graphic designer and spent most of his day working on computers, creating visual content for clients. He understood technical English terms related to his work, but he struggled to express his creative process and design decisions in English when collaborating with international clients. He could show them his work, but he had trouble explaining his artistic choices and creative thinking in English conversations. Carlos started practicing English narration during his design work. As he worked on projects, he would describe his process in simple English. I'm choosing colors. This looks good. I'm making this bigger. The client wants something different. I think this works better. Let me try another approach. This technique helped Carlos connect his professional expertise with English expression. Instead of just knowing English design vocabulary, he was learning to think about his creative process in English. After 6 weeks of consistent practice, Carlos's client presentations became much more confident and engaging. He could explain his design decisions, discuss alternative approaches, and collaborate more effectively during English language project meetings. Carlos realized that the practice had helped him develop what he called professional English intuition, the ability to express his expertise naturally rather than just translating technical terms. You can apply this same approach to any area of your life where you want to feel more confident using English. If you're interested in fitness, narrate your workouts in English. I'm lifting weights. This exercise is difficult. I feel strong today. My muscles are tired. I need to stretch. If you enjoy gardening, describe your gardening activities. I'm watering the plants. The flowers are growing well. This soil needs more water. The sun is very bright today. The beauty of this approach is that it makes English feel personal and meaningful, rather than generic and academic. When you use English to describe activities you care about and enjoy, the language becomes emotionally connected to positive experiences. This emotional connection makes English much easier to remember and access when you need it for real conversations. One of my students, Elena from Valencia, used this technique while caring for her young children. She started describing daily parenting activities in English. We're going to the park. Time to eat lunch? Let's read a book. You need to brush your teeth. Be careful with that toy. This practice not only improved Elena's English fluency, but also created a fun learning environment for her children, who started picking up English words and phrases naturally. The most important aspect of this technique is consistency, rather than perfection. You don't need to describe everything perfectly or use sophisticated vocabulary. The goal is to create regular opportunities for your brain to process real experiences in English. Start with the simplest possible descriptions, and gradually add more detail as the practice becomes more natural and automatic. As you continue practicing English narration during real activities, you'll notice that English starts feeling less like a foreign language and more like a natural part of your thinking process. Your brain will begin automatically choosing English for certain thoughts and situations, especially ones that you've practiced describing regularly. This automatic English thinking is the foundation of true fluency and confidence in English conversations. You're not just learning English words and phrases anymore. You're training your brain to live and think in English, which makes all other aspects of English communication much easier and more natural. Confidence comes from small victories, not perfect sentences. This is one of the most important things I want you to understand about building real English-speaking confidence. You don't need to wait until you can speak like a native speaker to feel good about your English abilities. You don't need to master complex grammar or sophisticated vocabulary before you can express yourself meaningfully. Confidence grows from successfully communicating your thoughts and ideas, even when you use simple words and basic sentences. Every time you share something you care about in English, you're building the foundation for lasting confidence. The secret to developing genuine English confidence is to start with topics you already know well and feel passionate about. When you talk about subjects you understand deeply and care about personally, your focus shifts from worrying about your English mistakes to sharing your knowledge and enthusiasm. This shift in focus is transformational because it changes English from something you're being tested on to something you're using as a tool for self-expression and connection with others. Let me tell you about Carlos from Barcelona. Carlos had been studying English for 6 years and had a solid understanding of grammar rules, extensive vocabulary knowledge, and could read English texts without difficulty. But when it came to speaking, he felt completely inadequate and self-conscious. He was convinced that his English wasn't good enough for real conversations, so he avoided speaking opportunities and stayed quiet in English-speaking environments. Carlos believed he needed to achieve near-perfect English before he could participate confidently in discussions. Everything changed when I suggested that Carlos start talking about football in English. Carlos was absolutely passionate about football. He followed multiple leagues, knew detailed statistics about players and teams, understood complex strategies and tactics, and could discuss football for hours in Spanish. But he had never considered using English to express his football knowledge and opinions. When I encouraged him to start thinking about football matches and player performances in English, Carlos was initially skeptical that this simple approach could help his overall English confidence. Carlos started by describing football matches to himself in basic English after watching games. Barcelona played well today. Messi scored 2 goals. The defense was strong. Real Madrid looked tired. The referee made bad decisions. These simple descriptions felt natural and easy because Carlos was expressing genuine thoughts about something he cared deeply about. He wasn't trying to impress anyone or demonstrate perfect English. He was simply using English as a tool to process and express his authentic opinions and observations. Within just 2 weeks, Carlos noticed something remarkable happening. When English-speaking tourists asked him about Spanish football, he found himself responding with confidence and enthusiasm. The English words were coming naturally because he had been practicing thinking about football in English regularly. More importantly, Carlos realized that people were genuinely interested in what he had to say, not how perfectly he said it. His passion and knowledge were much more important than his occasional grammar mistakes or simple vocabulary choices. This experience completely transformed Carlos's relationship with English. He started using the same approach with other topics he cared about. He began thinking about his work as an architect in English, describing building designs and construction processes. He started expressing his opinions about Spanish cuisine in English when cooking his favorite recipes. Each topic he explored in English built his confidence further because he was always working from a foundation of genuine knowledge and personal interest. The key insight Carlos discovered is that confidence comes from successful communication, not perfect language. When you share something meaningful about a topic you understand well, and the other person understands and responds positively, you experience a victory that builds lasting confidence. These victories accumulate over time and create a strong foundation of self-assurance in your English abilities. This approach works so effectively because it aligns with how you naturally develop expertise and confidence in any area of life. You don't become confident by avoiding challenges or waiting until you're perfect. You become confident by successfully handling situations that matter to you, even when you make mistakes along the way. The same principle applies to English confidence. You build it by successfully expressing ideas that are important to you, using whatever English tools you currently have available. Let me share what happened with another student, Laura from Rome. Laura was a professional chef who felt extremely confident discussing culinary techniques and ingredient combinations in Italian, but became tongue-tied when English-speaking customers asked her about menu items or cooking methods. She had extensive knowledge about traditional Italian cuisine, but she believed her English wasn't sophisticated enough to convey her culinary expertise properly. When Laura started practicing describing her cooking process in English while she worked, everything changed. As she prepared dishes, she would think about what she was doing in simple English terms. I'm sautéing the onions. The garlic smells wonderful. This sauce needs more salt. The pasta is almost ready. The flavors are perfect together. She was expressing her professional knowledge in basic English, and it felt completely natural because she was working from her area of expertise. After a month of this practice, Laura's interactions with English-speaking customers became much more confident and engaging. She could explain traditional recipes, recommend wine pairings, and share the cultural significance of different dishes. Her customers loved hearing about Italian cuisine from someone who clearly understood and cared deeply about the food. Laura realized that her passion and knowledge were much more valuable than perfect English pronunciation or complex vocabulary. The beauty of this confidence-building approach is that it's completely personalized to your interests and expertise. If you're passionate about music, start thinking about your favorite songs and artists in English. If you love gardening, begin describing your plants and gardening techniques in simple English. If you're interested in technology, practice explaining how different devices work using basic English vocabulary. The topics you choose should be things that you could talk about easily for 30 minutes or more in your native language. These are areas where you have genuine knowledge, personal experience, and authentic opinions. When you practice expressing these same ideas in English, you're building from strength rather than weakness. You're using English to share things that matter to you, not just to complete artificial exercises or practice grammar patterns. One of the most important aspects of this approach is accepting that simple English can be just as effective as complex English for meaningful communication. You don't need to know the most sophisticated vocabulary to share your thoughts about topics you care about. Clear, simple expression is often more powerful than complicated sentences that might confuse your listener. As you continue building confidence through topics you're passionate about, you'll discover that your English abilities are much stronger than you originally thought. You'll realize that you can communicate meaningfully about subjects that matter to you, and that realization will give you the courage to explore new topics and take on more challenging English conversations. Confidence breeds confidence, and each successful communication experience makes the next one easier and more natural. This gradual confidence-building process creates a positive cycle that accelerates your overall English development, while making the learning process enjoyable and personally meaningful rather than stressful and intimidating. The key to thinking in English is daily practice, not perfect practice. This is the most important principle I want you to take away from everything we've discussed today. You don't need to practice for hours every day. You don't need perfect conditions or expensive materials. You don't need to wait until you have more vocabulary or better grammar knowledge. What you need is consistent daily practice that gradually trains your brain to operate naturally in English. Even 10 minutes a day when done consistently will create dramatic changes in how easily and automatically you think in English. Let me tell you about Emma from Amsterdam. Emma contacted me 8 months ago, feeling completely frustrated with her English progress. She had been studying English for over 5 years, had completed multiple courses, owned shelves full of English textbooks, and spent hours every weekend doing English exercises. But despite all this effort, English still felt foreign and unnatural to her. When she tried to speak English, she would translate everything from Dutch first, which made her conversations slow and exhausting. Emma was convinced she needed to study even more intensively to make progress. When I suggested that Emma reduce her study time and focus on just 10 minutes of daily English thinking practice, she was skeptical. She believed that more study time would lead to faster progress, and 10 minutes seemed far too little to make any meaningful difference. But Emma was willing to try a different approach because her intensive study methods hadn't been giving her the natural fluency she wanted. Emma decided to use her morning coffee time for this daily English thinking practice. Every morning, while drinking her coffee and getting ready for her day, she would spend exactly 10 minutes thinking only in English. She would describe what she could see around her kitchen, think about her plans for the day, reflect on how she was feeling, and mentally narrate her morning routine. She set a timer to make sure she practiced for the full 10 minutes, and she committed to doing this every single day without exception. The first few days were challenging for Emma. Her brain kept wanting to slip back into Dutch, and she had to consciously redirect her thoughts to English repeatedly. Some mornings, she felt like she was struggling to find English words for simple concepts, and she worried that the practice wasn't helping. But Emma stuck with the routine because she had committed to trying this approach for at least 1 month before evaluating its effectiveness. By the end of the first week, Emma started noticing small changes. English words were coming to her more quickly during her morning practice sessions. She was spending less mental energy forcing herself to think in English and more energy actually expressing her thoughts. By the second week, Emma realized that she was occasionally thinking in English at other times during the day, without consciously trying to do so. The real breakthrough came after 3 weeks of consistent practice. Emma was having a conversation with an English-speaking colleague at work, and she suddenly realized that she wasn't translating from Dutch anymore. The English words were coming directly to her mind, and the conversation felt natural and effortless. Emma couldn't believe that such a simple daily practice had created such a dramatic change in her English fluency. After 2 months of daily 10-minute practice sessions, Emma told me that English had become completely natural to her. She was thinking in English spontaneously throughout the day. English conversations felt easy and comfortable, and she no longer experienced the mental fatigue that used to accompany every English interaction. Emma realized that consistency had been much more important than intensity in developing natural English thinking patterns. This transformation happens because daily practice creates and strengthens neural pathways in your brain that support English thinking. Every day that you spend time thinking in English, you're making those pathways more automatic and accessible. When you skip days or practice inconsistently, those pathways don't develop as strongly, and English thinking remains effortful and unnatural. But when you practice consistently, even for short periods, your brain adapts and makes English thinking increasingly automatic. The 10-minute daily practice approach works so well because it's sustainable and manageable. Most people can find 10 minutes in their daily routine without major lifestyle changes or sacrifices. You might choose to practice during your morning coffee, during your commute, while exercising, during lunch break, or before going to bed. The specific time doesn't matter as much as the consistency of doing it every single day. During your 10-minute practice sessions, you can use any of the techniques we've discussed today. You might spend the time narrating your current activities, having internal conversations with yourself, describing what you can see around you, or thinking about topics you're passionate about. The key is to keep your thoughts in English for the entire 10 minutes, gently redirecting your mind back to English whenever it slips into your native language. Let me share what happened with another student, David from Lisbon. David was a busy father of 2 young children who felt like he never had time for English practice. He wanted to improve his English for career advancement, but between work responsibilities and family obligations, he couldn't find large blocks of time for traditional study methods. When I suggested the 10-minute daily approach, David was initially doubtful that such a small time investment could make a real difference. David chose to practice English thinking during his daily walk with the family dog. Every evening during this 20-minute walk, he would spend the first 10 minutes thinking only in English about his day, his family, his work challenges, and his future goals. The second 10 minutes, he would allow his mind to relax and think in Portuguese if it wanted to. This approach made the practice feel sustainable and non-stressful. After 6 weeks of consistent practice, David's wife commented that his English phone conversations for work sounded much more confident and natural. David realized that the daily thinking practice had improved not just his English fluency, but also his ability to express complex professional ideas in English. He was having easier conversations with international colleagues and feeling more comfortable in English business meetings. The most beautiful aspect of consistent daily practice is that it compounds over time. Each day of practice builds on the previous day's progress. What feels difficult and effortful in the first week becomes easier in the second week, natural in the third week, and automatic by the end of the first month. This gradual progression means you're making steady progress even when you don't notice dramatic day-to-day changes. Remember, thinking in English is a skill that develops gradually, just like any other complex skill. You wouldn't expect to become an excellent musician, athlete, or artist overnight, and you shouldn't expect instant English fluency either. But with consistent daily practice, you will see steady improvement that accumulates into significant progress over weeks and months. Be patient with yourself during this process. Some days your English thinking will feel easier and more natural than others. Some days you'll feel like you're making great progress, and other days you might feel stuck or frustrated. This variation is completely normal and doesn't mean you're not improving. The key is to maintain your daily practice regardless of how you feel on any particular day. Celebrate small progress along the way. Notice when English words come to you more quickly. Appreciate moments when you catch yourself thinking in English spontaneously. Recognize when English conversations feel easier than they used to. These small victories are signs that your consistent practice is working and that you're developing the natural English thinking ability you've been working toward. You're closer to fluent English thinking than you believe. With daily practice, patience, and trust in the process, you will develop the confident, natural English fluency you've been dreaming about. The journey starts with just 10 minutes today.